"Mummy, please help him." The small, trembling voice of 6-year-old Leo cut through the heavy, humid air of the parking lot, anchoring Elsie Kirk to the moment just as her training began to override her maternal instincts. She looked down at her son, his small hand gripping the fabric of her charcoal gray combat trousers so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and confusion as he pointed toward the entrance of the diner. Elsie shifted her weight, the gravel crunching softly under her boots. She ran a hand through her long blonde hair, pushing it back from her face, her blue eyes narrowing as she assessed the scene 20 feet away. The mid-afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt, baking the small town in a haze of heat that made the horizon shimmer, but the temperature dropping in her veins had nothing to do with the weather. 3 men stood in a semicircle near the diner's glass door, their postures aggressive, their shadows looming over a 4th figure. The 3 were large, built with the thick, undisciplined bulk of men who confused size with strength. They wore cut-off shirts and oil-stained jeans, their laughter harsh and barking, like coyotes cornering a wounded animal. In the center of their torment stood an elderly man. He was slight, his spine curved with the weight of decades, clutching a cane that looked like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He wore a faded trucker hat with a patch that was too worn to read from this distance, and he was trying to maneuver around the wall of muscle blocking his path to a rusted sedan. Elsie took a breath, the air filling her lungs and expanding the tight royal blue short-sleeve top she wore. She felt the familiar switch flip in the base of her brain. It was a transition from civilian to combatant, a shift in color codes from yellow to orange. She wasn't just a mother on a road trip anymore. She was a weapons systems operator, a leader of Marines, and right now she was the only thing standing between a predator and prey. "Wait here, Leo," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the softness she reserved for bedtime stories. She pointed to the front bumper of their SUV. "Do not move from this spot. Do you understand?" Leo nodded, sensing the change in her. He let go of her trousers and stepped back, his eyes locked on the scene. Elsie began to walk. She didn't rush. Rushing signaled panic. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, her arms loose at her sides, her steps silent despite the heavy boots. She watched the hands of the 3 men. Hands were what killed you. The first man, the tallest of the 3 with a sunburned neck and a goatee, was poking the old man in the chest. "Look at him," the tall man sneered, his voice carrying over the low hum of traffic. "Can't even walk straight. You drunk old-timer. You shouldn't be driving. Maybe we should take those keys for your own safety." The old man's voice was a dry rattle, shaking with indignation rather than fear. "I am not drunk. I just want to go home. Please, let me pass." The second man, shorter but wider, kicked the tip of the old man's cane. The wood skidded an inch on the concrete, and the veteran stumbled, his hand flailing to catch the side of the building to steady himself. The 3 men roared with laughter. Elsie closed the distance. She stopped 6 feet away, the standard reaction gap. "Gentlemen," she said. The word was flat, devoid of warmth. It wasn't a greeting, it was a command for attention. The laughter died down slowly, replaced by looks of amused annoyance. The tall man turned, his eyes raking over Elsie from her boots to her blonde hair. He grinned, a slow predatory expression that made Elsie's skin crawl, though her face remained a mask of stone. "Well, look at this," he said, nudging the man next to him. "We got ourselves a little audience. Can we help you, sweetheart? Or are you just looking for directions to the mall?" Elsie didn't blink. She kept her eyes locked on his, her peripheral vision tracking the other 2. The old man looked at her, his watery eyes widening in panic. "Miss, please, just go," he whispered. "They're just having fun. Don't get involved." Elsie ignored the plea, her focus entirely on the threat. "You're blocking the exit," she said, her voice steady and even. "Step aside and let the gentleman get to his car." The third man, who had been leaning against the wall, pushed himself off and took a step toward her. He was chewing on a toothpick, looking her up and down with open disdain. "You got a lot of attitude for a soccer mom," he spat. "Why don't you go back to your kid and let the men talk? This ain't your business." "It became my business when you put your hands on him," Elsie replied. She didn't move back. She didn't flinch. She stood with her weight perfectly balanced, her hands open and relaxed near her waist. The tall man stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of stale beer and gasoline. He loomed over her, trying to use his height to intimidate. "Listen here, Blondie. You're pretty, so I'm gonna give you a pass. Turn around, walk away, and maybe we won't teach you some manners. You're out of your depth." Elsie looked up at him. She saw the dilated pupils, the tensing of his neck muscles. He was posturing, running on ego and adrenaline. He saw a woman in a tight blue shirt and assumed she was fragile. He saw the blonde hair and assumed she was vapid. He didn't see the scarring on her forearms from crawling through Scree and Helmand province. He didn't see the callus on her knuckle from thousands of hours on the heavy bag. He didn't see the Marine. "I'm asking you nicely," Elsie said, her voice dropping lower, almost a whisper. "Step away from the veteran." The use of the word veteran seemed to trigger something in the second man. Veteran, holding up the old man's hat. "This garbage? Any hobo can buy a patch at a surplus store. He probably stole it. Stolen valor, right boys? We're just verifying his credentials." He tossed the hat onto the ground and ground his boot into it. The image of the hat being crushed under a dirty boot hit Elsie with the force of a physical blow. For a split second, the diner parking lot vanished. The heat wasn't from the American sun, but from the burning trash pits of a forward operating base. She saw a dusty, battered patrol cap sitting on a folded flag. She remembered the smell of cordite and the sound of a chaplain's voice reading a psalm. That hat wasn't just fabric, it was a timeline of survival. It was a symbol of friends lost and innocence surrendered. To disrespect it was a sin greater than the assault itself. The flash lasted less than a heartbeat, but it hardened her resolve into something unbreakable. "Pick it up," Elsie said. The tall man laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Or what? You gonna hit me with your purse?" "Pick it up," the tall man sneered and reached out, his hand aiming to shove her shoulder, a dismissive gesture meant to push her away like a child. "Look, lady, I'm done with." As his hand crossed the boundary of her personal space, the air in the parking lot seemed to snap. Elsie didn't think. She reacted. Her training, drilled into her over a decade of service, took over. Her left hand came up in a blur, parrying his wrist outward. At the same time, she stepped in, closing the gap he thought protected him. Her right hand didn't form a fist, it stayed open, a ridge hand strike that drove hard into the bundle of nerves where his neck met his shoulder. The man's knees buckled instantly. The nerve strike sent a shock wave of paralysis down his arm and a spike of agony into his brain. He gasped, his eyes bulging, and stumbled back. Elsie didn't stop. She pivoted, keeping the tall man between her and his friends. "You crazy bend," the second man yelled, lunging forward. He swung a wide, clumsy haymaker aimed at her head. Elsie ducked under the swing, the wind of his fist ruffling her blonde hair. She moved inside his guard, her center of gravity dropping. She grabbed his extended arm, clamped it against her chest, and swept her leg behind his right calf. It was a textbook leg sweep, executed with the precision of a martial arts instructor trainer. She torqued her hips, and the man's 200 pounds went airborne. He slammed into the concrete with a bone-rattling thud, the air rushing out of his lungs in a wheezing groan. He writhed on the ground, clutching his back. The fight instantly drained from him. The third man, the one with the toothpick, froze. He looked at his leader clutching his neck, then at his friend gasping for air on the ground, and finally at the woman standing before him. Elsie hadn't even broken a sweat. She stood in a modified fighting stance, her hands up, eyes scanning for the next movement. "Do you want to participate?" she asked. The question was genuine, devoid of bravado. She was simply asking if he required neutralization. The third man raised his hands, backing away slowly. No, lady, we're good. Get your friends," Elsie commanded, "and get out of here." Behind her, the diner door swung open with a crash. A hush had fallen over the parking lot, the bystanders who had been watching in paralyzed silence now murmuring in shock. But Elsie didn't look at the crowd. She kept her eyes on the threats until the tall man groaned, staggering to his feet, holding his neck. "You're gonna pay for that," he rasped, though he kept his distance. "You assaulted me. I'm calling the cops. You're going to jail, sweetie." "Call them," Elsie said, straightening her shirt. From the edge of the lot, a voice rang out. "Already done." Elsie didn't turn, maintaining security, but she recognized the tone of authority. A man in a sheriff's deputy uniform was striding across the lot, his hand resting on his belt, though not on his weapon. He was an older man, thick around the middle, but his eyes were sharp. "What is going on here?" the deputy demanded, stopping between the trio of men and Elsie. "Officer," the tall man pointed a shaking finger at Elsie. "This crazy woman just attacked us. We were just talking to this old guy, helping him with his car, and she came over and started hitting us. Look at Mike. She nearly broke his back." The deputy looked down at Mike, who was still wheezing on the ground, then at Elsie. He took in her appearance, the combat trousers, the stance, the calm demeanor that contrasted wildly with the chaos she had just unleashed. "Is that right, ma'am?" Elsie relaxed her stance slightly, bringing her heels together, her hands moving behind her back in a parade rest out of habit before she caught herself. They were physically harassing this gentleman, she said, nodding toward the veteran who was still pressed against the wall. They destroyed his property and were escalating to physical violence. I intervened to prevent injury to the victim. Victim? The tall man scoffed. He's fine. We didn't touch him. You're the psycho. The deputy looked at the old man. Sir, are you all right? The veteran trembled, reaching down to pick up his flattened hat. He dusted it off with shaking hands. The deputy turned back to the three men. His expression hardened. I've had calls about you boys before. Loitering, harassing tourists. Looks like you picked the wrong tourist today. That's assault, the tall man screamed, stepping toward the deputy. Arrest her. You can't just let her beat us up. She's dangerous. I need to see some identification, everyone. The deputy sighed. Elsie moved to her back pocket. She pulled out a slim wallet. She bypassed her driver's license and slid out her Geneva Convention's identification card, her CAC. She handed it to the deputy. The tall man smirked. What's that? A library card. The deputy took the card. He looked at the photo, then at the rank insignia, then at the name. His eyebrows shot up. He looked from the card to Elsie, his eyes widening. He handed the card back with a sudden sharp reverence. He turned to the tall man. You boys are lucky. Lucky. The tall man spat. She assaulted us. The deputy stepped closer to the tall man, dropping his voice to a growl. She defended a citizen. And if she wanted to hurt you, son, you wouldn't be standing here arguing with me. You'd be in the back of an ambulance. He turned back to Elsie. Major Kirk, I apologize for the trouble. The silence that followed the title was absolute. The tall man's jaw dropped. Major, Elsie took the card back. No apology necessary, deputy. Just wanted to ensure the gentleman was safe. The deputy nodded. I'll handle these three from here. We have dashcam footage from the cruiser pulling up, and plenty of witnesses. As the deputy began to corral the three men, moving them toward his cruiser, the sound of heavy tires on gravel drew everyone's attention. A black government SUV, followed by two large transport vans, pulled into the diner lot. The vehicles were marked with the emblem of the United States Marine Corps Recruiting Command. Doors opened, and a stream of uniformed Marines poured out, recruiters and a few senior officers in service khakis, stopping for a meal while in transit. They saw the commotion, the deputy, and then they saw Elsie. One of the officers, a lieutenant colonel with silver oak leaves on his collar, paused. He squinted through the glare, then his face broke into a look of recognition. He marched over, the sea of Marines parting for him. Kirk? The lieutenant colonel barked. Elsie Kirk? Elsie turned, snapping to attention instinctively. Sir, the colonel grinned, extending a hand. I haven't seen you since Pendleton. What in the world is going on here? Just a little disagreement over parking etiquette, sir, Elsie said, shaking his hand firmly. The colonel looked at the three men who were now watching with pale faces as a dozen fit, uniformed Marines stood behind the woman they had just called a soccer mom. He looked at the old veteran clutching his hat. He put the pieces together instantly. The colonel turned to the crowd that had gathered. He raised his voice, not shouting but projecting with command presence. For those of you who don't know, you're in the presence of one of the Corps' finest. Major Elsie Kirk didn't just help here. He looked at the tall man, his eyes cold. She is a former company commander and a battalion landing team executive officer. She holds the Silver Star for gallantry in action. She led a counter-assault that saved 30 Marines from an ambush in the Helmand Valley. She is a 4th-degree black belt in the Marine Corps martial arts program. The colonel stepped closer to the antagonists. You boys thought you were picking on a helpless woman. You were picking on a legend. You're lucky she showed restraint. If this were 10 years ago and the rules of engagement were different, you wouldn't be walking away. The tall man looked at the ground, shame burning his neck brighter than his sunburn. The other two wouldn't even make eye contact. The physical defeat was painful, but this public dismantling of their ego by a superior force was devastating. The colonel turned back to Elsie. Heading to the new duty station. Yes, sir. Quantico. Teaching at the basic school. Good. They need you. The colonel looked at the old veteran. He walked over, his demeanor softening. Sir, I'm sorry you had to go through this. The old man looked up, tears in his eyes. He straightened his back, wincing slightly, and brought a trembling hand up to his brow. A salute. Slow, imperfect, but filled with dignity. Thank you, the old man whispered, to both of you. Elsie returned the salute, crisp and perfect. It was a language without words, a bond between the generations of those who had served. Semper Fi, sir, she said softly. The colonel signaled his Marines. All right, show's over. Let's get some chow. But first he pointed to the three men being cuffed by the deputy. Someone help the sheriff if he needs it. Elsie walked back toward the SUV. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her limbs feeling heavy but steady. The crowd parted for her, looking at her with a mixture of awe and embarrassment for having watched and done nothing. She reached the car where Leo was still standing by the bumper, exactly where she had left him. His eyes were huge. "Mummy," he said, his voice quiet. "You beat the bad men." Elsie knelt down, ignoring the grease stain on her trousers. She took Leo's hands in hers. "Listen to me, Leo. I didn't beat them because I wanted to. I stopped them because they were hurting someone who couldn't protect himself. Do you understand?" Leo nodded slowly. "Because he was old. Because he was alone," Elsie corrected. "We don't use our strength to show off. We use it to shield others. That's what being strong means. It's not about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about doing the right thing when it's scary." She pulled him into a hug, burying her face in his small shoulder, smelling the scent of sunscreen and childhood, grounding herself back in the reality of being a mother. The warrior receded, stored away for the next time the world required her, but the mother remained. Behind them, the deputy was shoving the tall man into the back of the cruiser. The tall man looked out the window, catching Elsie's eye one last time. There was no defiance left, only a fearful respect. He had learned a lesson that day, one that wasn't written in any book but was etched into the bruised nerve of his shoulder. Never judge the fight by the package it comes in. Elsie stood up, taking Leo's hand. "Come on, Bug, let's get some ice cream. I think we earned it." As they walked toward the diner, passing the line of respectful Marines who nodded as she passed, Elsie Kirk didn't look like a hero. She didn't look like a Silver Star recipient or a martial arts expert. She just looked like a mom in a blue shirt, holding her son's hand, walking into the diner to buy a treat. And that, she knew, was the best disguise of all. Later that evening, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and bruised orange. Elsie sat on the hood of her SUV at a rest stop 50 miles down the road, Leo asleep in the back seat. She held a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the darkening highway. The silence of the evening was a stark contrast to the noise of the afternoon. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it to find a picture. It was the old veteran, sitting at a table in the diner, surrounded by the young Marines from the bus. They were listening to him speak, their faces attentive, respectful. He was smiling, really smiling, looking 10 years younger. Below the picture was a text. "Deputy gave me your number from the report. Thought you'd want to see this. He's telling them about Inshaw. You did good, Major. Safe travels." Elsie smiled, a small private expression that didn't need to be shared with anyone. She typed a quick reply, "Look after him." She put the phone away and looked back at the highway. The road ahead was long, and there would be other bullies, other injustices, other moments where the world felt cruel and unfair. But as long as she had breath in her lungs and the training in her bones, she would be the shield. She hopped off the hood, tossed the coffee cup in the trash, and climbed back into the driver's seat. She checked the rearview mirror, glancing at her sleeping son. "Sleep tight, Leo," she whispered. "Mummy's got the watch." She put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road, the taillights fading into the night, an unassuming hero continuing her journey, hidden in plain sight, ready for whatever came next. The incident at the diner would become local legend. The story of the soccer mom Marine would be told in that town for years. The three men would eventually plead guilty to assault and disorderly conduct, receiving probation and mandatory community service they would perform at the local VFW hall, cleaning floors and listening to the stories of men they had once mocked. The tall man in particular would never forget the feeling of that grip, the absolute certainty of defeat before the first blow was even truly struck. It changed him. He stopped drinking. He started working. He learned humility the hard way, at the hands of a woman in a royal blue shirt. And somewhere in the archives of the Marine Corps, a service record continued to grow, documenting the career of Elsie Kirk. But the entry for that Tuesday in a dusty diner parking lot wouldn't be written in official ink. It would be written in the memory of an old man who got his dignity back, and a little boy who learned that his mother was the strongest person in the world. Flashback to 15 years prior. Paris Island. The sand pit. The heat was identical to the diner parking lot. A young Elsie, hair shaved, face covered in mud, screaming at the top of her lungs as she executed a pugil stick bout. "Kill, kill, kill," the drill instructor screamed. Elsie drove the stick forward, knocking her opponent down. She didn't stop. She stood over them, chest heaving, eyes wild. "Control," the instructor barked. "Violence of action, recruit, but controlled. You are a switch, on and off. Do you understand?" "Aye, sir," Elsie screamed back. "Turn it off." Elsie took a breath. She lowered the weapon. She extended a hand to the recruit on the ground. She pulled her up. Good. The instructor nodded. Never forget, you turn it on to survive. You turn it off to live. Back in the present, Elsie drove through the night. The switch was off, but the hand was still on the wheel, steady and sure. The lesson had stuck. Violence was a tool, not a lifestyle. And mercy was a privilege of the strong. The miles rolled by. The stars came out. And in the quiet of the car, Elsie Kirk, the unassuming hero, drove on. Just another set of headlights in the dark, watching over the world in her own way. The diner sat quiet now, the gravel lot empty save for a few trucks. But the air still felt charged, as if the energy of the confrontation had left a static residue. The old man's car was gone, but the impression of his gratitude remained. The deputy finished his paperwork in his cruiser, glancing at the spot where Elsie had stood. He shook his head, chuckling softly. Don't judge a book by its cover, he muttered to himself, or a Marine by her minivan. He put the car in drive and rolled out, leaving the empty lot to the crickets in the cooling asphalt. The story was over, but the echo remained. And for anyone paying attention, it was a reminder. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear charcoal gray combat trousers and a royal blue top. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a mother. Elsie's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from her husband, deployed overseas. Hope the road trip is going well. Miss you and Leo. Stay safe. Elsie tapped the steering wheel, thinking of how to reply. She didn't want to worry him. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. It was just a Tuesday. All good here, she typed. Just a quiet drive. Leo is sleeping. We miss you too. Love you. She hit send. It wasn't a lie. It was a quiet drive now. And the noise of the afternoon was just another day at the office, even if the office was a roadside diner. She adjusted the rearview mirror, checking Leo one last time. He shifted in his sleep, a small smile on his face. He felt safe. And because of that, Elsie knew she had done her job. The warrior and the mother were one and the same, and that was a force no bully could ever hope to defeat. The end. If you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and justice, please like and share to honor our veterans. And don't forget to subscribe to She Chose Valor for more stories of the women who serve.